And just one more thing, which is in terms of science fiction as a whole, do you feel that now it's had it does have a greater level of acceptance, that now it is beginning to be revered? Because it, for a long time, I suppose crime fiction, horror fiction, and science fiction have all been ghettoized. And I was on a show recently talking about Roadside Picnic by the Strugatsky brothers, and the other two people had never read any science fiction, were kind of rather, even though it's connected to Tarkovsky, so it's got all of the art house stuff that might be, but they were still kind of, I was really amazed because that was a fascinating book and I really enjoyed it. And it still seems there's a bit of a battle going on with that.
Yeah, it's a funny situation where it is a ghetto that is a far more upscale neighborhood than the term ghetto implies, right? So if you look at the bestseller lists, if you look at the lists of the top grossing films and television shows over the last couple of decades, it's utterly dominated by fantasy and science fiction. I mean, it's just complete domination. I mean, the New York Times had to keep rejiggering how they calculated and how they classified their bestseller list in order to prevent the Harry Potter books from just filling the list, year after year, decade after decade. So the top films, the top TV shows, video games are heavily science fiction and fantasy based, and we know that video games are a larger market than television now. Or than film and television. So it's just a funny situation where I guess it kind of seems like we're in a ghetto when we're talking to sort of literary fiction people, but they're living in a really small corner of the space, and they're not where the focus of popular attention is really directed.
Yeah, I always find it interesting when certain people who try and say, but Margaret Atwood doesn't actually write science fiction. There's a certain level of reverence where, well, it's kind of. We've got an enormous number, as I predicted, one of my rare accurate predictions, an enormous number of questions. The first one, again, something we was just beforehand, and I don't know if you want to answer this or not, from Jane, which is Mark Zuckerberg, hero or villain?
Well, I think it's clear that that social media in general and Facebook in particular have got a lot to answer for in terms of the effect that they've had on our society. Now, how that might change. I'm surrounded by heavenly radiance here because the sun just came out in Seattle. We don't normally have that. We try to go back to a more gloomy look. I think time will tell, but right now the business model of social media, as we've all seen, is based on an algorithmic system that tends to feed people whatever reflects the highest level of emotional engagement. And when you let that experiment run, without any brakes on it across the whole world for years at a time, it creates breakdowns in our ability to function as a democratic society. So I don't think that any of this was a deliberate choice. I think it's just sort of a doomsday machine that got out of hand. I think that's all in the past, and what matters now is what these people do with the situation we've got now that it's understood what has happened.
Next question is from an anonymous attendee, though, who says that they've been enjoying your work since 1998 and been fascinated to know, first of all, how you conduct your research and how critical is it for you to make the work historically and scientifically accurate?
It depends a bit on the nature of the project. So, one is always looking for little bits, little elements that can contribute good story ideas, and many times those emerge from research. So, in reading about historical events, you might come across things that are remarkable in some way and that you never would have imagined on your own. And so that's a great source of ideas. And as I was talking about earlier, if you're doing something that's more science or engineering based, again, the more research you do into how these things work, the more opportunities you can stumble upon for twists in a story, or little things you wouldn't have thought of yourself, but that when you put them into the story, add a kind of verisimilitude and help draw the reader in and make them really sell the idea. So I would, without being coy, I would say you sort of have to do enough research, but not too much. And that is something that one learns over time. It's not obvious at first, but my general trend earlier in my career was to over research, and then have too much material to work with and have to do a lot of cutting back. Once you've got that sort of thoroughly pounded into your head, then I think you develop a certain kind of awareness of how much is enough. I can go into a book or visit a museum or visit some historical site and now kind of have a sense as to whether I've got enough, and at that point, I tend to stop gathering new material, not because it's not interesting, because it's frequently fascinating, but I just know I've got what I need to write that next chapter.
Right, thank you. Next question is, as the author of Cryptonomicon, what do you think of cryptocurrencies? A disaster for the planet or the future of growth? And of course, you're allowed to have an alternative answer. It's not.
Yeah, I was going to say that's quite a choice. No, I understand. The traditional Bitcoin is based on a blockchain that it's based on a system that only works if you spend a lot of energy mining these coins by doing complicated mathematical calculations, and so it's not good for the planet for sure. I don't think I've been talking to a lot of people in this space, and none of them sees that as really the future of cryptocurrency. There's all sorts of other ways of making cryptocurrencies that use much less energy, and moreover, some of them just build in carbon offsets. So for what carbon they do produce, they're buying carbon capture credits. So I think that the environmental objection to cryptocurrencies, while it was well founded a few years ago, is rapidly sort of receding, and so then we get into other questions about whether it's good or bad, and most of a lot of the adherents of cryptocurrency are big fans of anonymity and decentralization. And what we're sort of finding is that neither of those is practically working out the way it was expected. There are ways to figure out who owns a given wallet. Since all transactions on a blockchain are public, it's not hard in most cases to trace wallets to specific people. The decentralization is something that hasn't materialized in practice as much as was hoped. But I think that so setting all that aside, there are some really interesting things that you can do with it, with cryptocurrencies involving smart contracts and so on, that are that I think are really the thing that people are going to fasten on to in coming years, and make it into a really interesting new technology.
Thank you. Next question is from Peter, who would like to know, he said, what would you say to many respectable people who object to the use of technology to fix social problems, how we live, flying, eating meat, etc.? Some people would call it technological utopianism.
Well, I mean, my shirt is held closed by this button, which is a technology. There's no clear line, between technology and non-technology. We're completely surrounded by and immersed in all kinds of technologies. So when people talk this way, they're usually talking about anything new. So anything invented after I was born is technology, and I think it's a bit facile to say. This questioner probably doesn't mean it this way, but some people speak of technology or solutionism or utopianism in a way that I think doesn't bear up under serious analysis. The climate crisis has come about because we burned a lot of stuff in various technological machines, and that's a fact. Anyone who understands the science knows that it happened. The solution to that problem is not to stop burning things, because it won't help. Carbon dioxide remains in the atmosphere for hundreds of thousands or even millions of years before natural processes can extract it. So we have no choice but to create new technologies that'll remove that carbon dioxide from the air. And to point out that fact isn't utopianism or solutionism or any of that. It's just stating the reality. And I think there are very few people who are so naive anymore as to think that to adopt that kind of utopian mentality that we used to see in the middle of the 20th century.
Thank you. Teresa wondered if you would talk about your experiences of the Silicon Valley technocrats who adore your work and indeed are now building metaverses. Is there anything you'd like to share? The names she particularly mentions are Elon Musk and Bill Gates, but obviously, again, it is free to you to answer in any way you wish.
Oh, thanks. Well, I haven't met Elon Musk. We've had a lot of near misses, but I've met Bill Gates. We're living in a funny era of history where people with strong grasp of math, science, technology were able to build big companies and accumulate a lot of wealth. And so they tend to have tastes that are geared towards science fiction. So sort of a natural combination. And so, you know, it's gratifying to have a successful person say that they like your work. You know, it's from time to time one gets to meet such a person and have a conversation with them. I don't think that they're really making big decisions based on what they see in a work of fiction. They're way too smart and sort of savvy about finance and business to go around making choices that way. You know, I think it's more of a friendly relationship and probably less influential, less of a direct influence than one might imagine.
And the final question, apologies, we get so many questions. I'm sorry I haven't been able to get through all of them. Tim would like to know, is the way to change the world first in our hearts and hands and then work outwards from there? What is the role of stories and compassion?
Well, I think that, I mean, compassion is a trait that everyone has at some level, unless they're really suffering from a severe psychiatric disorder. You know, and so the question is, how do we allocate it? There's 7 billion people on the earth. We can't feel compassion for all of them. Most of us feel we're only capable of feeling true compassion for maybe a few hundred or maybe as many as 1,000 people in our immediate circle, and everyone else is just kind of an abstraction. If we see a photograph of a bereaved mother in a disaster zone, or you know, something like that, we can momentarily feel compassion for them, but we don't generally feel real compassion outside of our circle. So I think compassion is a good thing to have, but to rely on it too much is likely to maybe not produce the results that we would hope for. I think it's better in the long run to engage on the basis of facts and logic, because that enables us to see patterns such as, you know, climate change and so on that that can be obscured if all we're doing is reacting emotively to the feelings of specific people. It sounds sort of like a chilly technocrat thing to say, but I think it's best in the long run.
Neil, thank you very much. Termination Shock is out now. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching this and to the How To Academy. And Neil, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
I enjoyed it. Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.